because, and that's like his ability to know everything and his ability to be present everywhere. Now, we can't do that, but the popular notion that God being outside of space and time is, like I said, like we talked about before, you have time, and both time and space are defined by location and extension, okay? You have, space is easy, you know, we're here, and I take up so much square feet, you know, and you may take up less, but that's space, you know. I'm sitting on the stool, that's where I'm in Idaho. Now, I can't extend past my limitations, my own existence, right? Now, in space, you have the same problem. You have location and extension in space. We have a time, and we have, I was born at a certain time, and I've been on the planet a certain time, you know. Then we come to the end of that time, and which is the question about time. Now, those same questions exist in physics, because, you know, physics realizes, we're getting now in physics to where we realize that the universe is not all there is in a certain way. It's all that exists in the universe, because that's a tautology almost. But just logically, you think of that. And I like to listen to them debate, because that's where I get most of my information, is listening to different people debate. The first thing you notice when you start listening to the debates is that not everybody, that's the most obvious thing, okay? And in physics, there's a disagreement that goes back to Isaac Newton. And we did not understand Isaac Newton. This is Paul Davies in Australia. In his book, where he writes about it, that Einstein disagrees with Newton over this concept of time. The reason is when we look at a star, we're looking at some light that is a certain amount, certain age, okay? If the star's 1,000 light years away, the light you're looking at is 1,000 years old, okay? Now, I'm not gonna use billions and millions and billions, because the reason is because if you get into physics, if you listen to them debate, they're not really sure whether they can figure out the age of stars because of the problem with redshift in the light spectrum and stuff. And we've listened to physicists, astrophysicists, that disagreed with the motion of the universe. Now, and I can't go there, that's way beyond my grade. So there are some that don't agree. And one of the evidences of that I remember was that constellations don't change over thousands and thousands of years. If you look at constellations in the Egyptian or in the Chinese, you know, literature and whatever, their art of the sky, the constellations look exactly the same. Well, if they're moving at great speeds, they wouldn't look the same. Okay, they would pull apart, and that was one of the evidences. Now, what's my argument for it? I don't have one. Okay. So I'm just giving that to you. So there's a lot of questions that people don't know about, but the basic thing comes down to what's called synchronicity. In other words, we know that when clocks travel at high rates of speed, they slow down, okay? They've actually put clocks on airplanes that flew them around the world, and they come back at different times. Okay, now if the problem with us is we are so limited that we can't look at things great distances away in the present. In other words, everything we look at in the sky is past. It's past. Okay. Now, so the time that can you observe something that synchronizes with our present time? Can you observe things far distance? You're looking at light traveling at 186,000 miles per second. You're looking at light coming to the Earth, and anything you see at great distances, you have to account for the time that light has to come here. Well, and so the question, and if modern physics, and they don't agree on this either, is that nothing can exceed the speed of light. And I've heard people, basically define that. That's the defining thing in the universe. But some people don't agree with that. Some big physicists, they don't agree that the speed of light is the maximum or it's the outer limit. Okay? Because if you want to observe something out there at the same time as synchronized with his time. And the answer is that he's outside of space and time. But if you think about that, that's a no answer. Okay? Because I said, what has no extension or location in space, and what has neither location or extension in time? There's one thing that can do that. One thing. That's deceptive, though. What is outside of space and time? Has neither location or extension. Because when you say something's outside of space, you're saying it is not located anywhere and it doesn't extend anywhere. Okay? And the same thing with time. If you say something's outside of time, you're saying it is not here now and it never will be. It never was. So what is that? It's only one answer. It's nothing. Okay? It's nothing. So you have a real problem. Atheists love our arguments for God and time and space because they think we're making their argument for them. And I kind of would agree with that. I think that. So the question comes, the popular opinion, popularly we think of God creating space and time. And I explained this last time. We think of space and time as part of the creation, as part of the universe, okay? Like a second would be a heartbeat, if you're healthy, that is. Me, it's 2 seconds, 2 or 3 seconds, right? So, actually, it's the other way around. It's about a quarter of a second. So I get more heartbeats in than most people do, athletes. A second, everything that we think of in time is in the universe, okay? Like the rotation of the Earth and the moon and the sun and the stars. They're all in motion. And because they're in motion, we define time by the motion of those objects. We define seconds by our heart rate. We define months by the moon. We define years by the sun. Okay? Now, if that is all there is to time, space and time, then they were created. That's easy to understand, right? They're created. However, then you have God existing at creation, and you have no space and time. And then you go back to that problem, what exists without space and time? Well, nothing does, okay? Now, so you have to think through this. Is time a heartbeat? No, it's not. Is time the moon's rotation around the Earth? No, that's not time. That's the measurement of time, okay? It's a measurement of time. And so our time is defined by creation itself, as we understand time. However, and this gets back to Einstein and Newton, they're not arguing over that. That's self-evident, okay? That is self-evident. What the argument between Isaac Newton and Einstein is that Einstein says everything is relative, and you get into this Eastern mysticism by especially the Amsterdam school of Einstein, the Germans. Now, they're not the only one, because my friends that are in aerospace engineering don't use Einstein's theory. They don't. And their comment is simply, we can use Isaac Newton and we get spaceships out and back fine without Einstein. Now, so the question is, how did Isaac Newton get away without relativity? And Paul Davies' answer is he was a believer. He believed in God, and that's how he did it. Now, I can't get any deeper than that because I don't know the actual physics of it, but without God, you have a physics problem with understanding how the universe relates and can synchronize itself. You know, how does the whole universe synchronize itself if everything is relative, everything is moving in motion, and that we should be flying apart? And that's where this guy that Gene and I went and heard him over in CSI quite a long time ago, but his comment, and he worked for the government. He was a United States government astronomer, and he said the reason things aren't flying apart is because they're not in motion like relativity, Einstein's relativity would lead us to conclude, and he didn't agree with that. So we come back to the nature of God. And I talked to you about this last time, was God has existed in the past. Time exists. Time is not a thing, and you have to get it's an abstract idea. It's an abstract idea. It's a characteristic of things or continuance. A thing or a continuant, because it doesn't have to be a thing. Like God is not a thing, but he's a continuant. He's something that continues. In what? Well, in space and time. Now, it's the Constitution, what makes up heaven and earth, and, you know, the heavens where God is, and the creation that he made. Space and time aren't things, and they're not like you would think of in a created universe. Now, we struggle with that even in physics and math, because this universe also has to be on some kind of space-time. You have to put the universe, and you can see what NASA tried to do when they put all their space photographs into one image, and it looks like a cone. I don't think it's a cone actually, but it kind of looks like a cone because it has a starting point. It has a starting area. It won't go to a point, and it has and it extends out. Now, if that cone or that image of theirs is continuing at thousands and thousands of miles per hour, second, whatever, then it should be changing constantly. Now, and that's a big problem for them because things seem to be constant. Now, in that and at that big area. So the problem with that is that the universe takes into image that there's something behind it. Now, I've listened to lots of lectures and lots of debates on this over the last years, probably decades, and everybody, this is one thing they don't disagree on, that our universe, seeable universe, is backed with what they call dark matter. And don't think of it as a picture with darkness, with black or dark blue or whatever. Don't think of it that way. Dark matter is just simply what we can't see. Okay? The reason it's dark is we can't see it. Doesn't mean nobody can see it. It just means we can't see it. But the illustration I gave was looking at a cat spider through a knothole in a board. You can see he's on a web, but the web is only this big. But if you know anything about cat spiders, their webs can be huge. I mean, really big, 3 feet. I've seen some of them that big. Now, so as you watch him move, if you're really good at physics and all kinds of things, you should be able to calculate the size of the web. If you watch the motion, when the cat spider jumps on a fly or something, and you see the web move, if you can figure that out and you can calculate the motion and the weight of the stuff, you should be able to figure out the size. So that's what they're that's my best image of it. That's what they're trying to do, is when they say there's dark matter, what they're saying is our universe moves, and it has motion in it, and behind that motion is what they call dark matter. There has to be something holding our universe on the fence, sort of like. The web has to be a lot bigger than what you're looking at through the knothole. Now, now they give dark matter names, okay? All kinds of different physics names, and I'm not going to get into that. But you realize that most of those things are mathematical, things that they are playing with in their head. Stephen Hawking apologized right before he died because he figured out that his ideas of black holes weren't sound mathematically, and so he had to retract that. Now, I don't know if you see that in print, if you're going to see that in the textbooks. Textbooks usually take a long time to catch up, but whatever his prediction of black holes was in the earlier days, because he got a Nobel Prize for that. But before he died, he disagreed with his findings. Anyway, even the guy up in Canada, Lee Smolin, who disagrees with just about everybody, said, has a recent one, he says, why dark matter matters. Now, and that was an essay he just did. So what they're basically saying is there's 95% more reality around our universe than there is matter in the universe. There's 95% more energy and more whatever makes reality that surrounds the universe than there is in the universe. Now, as believers, you have to be really careful of taking scientific terms and saying this is heaven, because their stuff changes all the time. Okay, it evolves with the rest of everything, and so you get caught in a trap by saying this is heaven. The 95% is the heaven. But let me say this: it's a very common concept goes back into the 17th century, 18th century. It's called analogy. In fact, all the early apologetics was using analogies, okay? And goes back to Butler and anyway, the earlier Lewis Drummond liked an analogous apologetics, and Butler's apologetics was also analogous. So, and I have a bunch of books in the back in my office there that are that way. Now, okay, so let's go back to the nature of God, okay? Our space and time is defined by the motion in the universe. God can't be defined within the limits of something he has made, okay? Just like we make, and this is what Paul is saying here, God is not formed by just that. That space and time, especially for dark matter and bigger things, is not defined by the space and time in the created universe. You follow me so far? Okay. That, you know, if all the known physics is correct, and that's a big if, you know, you don't have events in the space-time universe that are synchronous, that agree in space and time with each other. So, and there's no way for us to figure those out because they're outside of our realm of discovery, whatever. But then when you talk about heaven, you're talking, you know, if the 95% of dark matter is analogous to heaven, notice how I said that, it's analogous to heaven, then it's 95% bigger than the universe, which we already are lost in, okay? As far as discovering the known laws that run our universe, we're already struggling to get to the 5% that we can see. And so the 95% we can't see, they just have to speculate with their math and their philosophy. Now, I don't disagree with them. I don't have any way to disagree with them. It just is the way it is, okay? That's, I haven't seen anybody disagree with that. I mean, they debate everything, but I don't see that they're debating that there's a 95% reality around our known visible universe. They call it dark matter. And I do want to caution you from calling dark matter heaven because, like I said, tomorrow they may discover something else and call it something else. So, but it is analogous to what we see. And the reason I had us read this, you know, to the unknown God, God who made the world and all things in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in it. Okay? It says temples. But it really means he does not dwell in it. It says the earth is, the heavens is his throne and the earth is his footstool, to give you kind of a comparison. As though he's served by human hands, as though he needs anything. He doesn't need anything. He made from one all that live on the whole face of the earth, and in him we live and move and exist. I don't take that phrase, but don't mystify it with Eastern thought, okay? The reality of heaven surrounds this reality. This reality that's visible is locked into spatial and temporal existence. God himself is not. However, I am not saying that God is outside of space and time, because that's not, you know, I said that's not even a logical concept to me. Something can't be, some existing thing cannot be outside of existence. You understand? Existence is defined by space and time. If you say something exists, then you're saying, you can't say at this next verb, you know, that it's outside of space and time. Because if it exists, what you're saying is it is in space and time. Does that make sense? If you say he is outside of existence, because that's what space and time is. Existence is defined by space and time. I've existed for 70 years. That's space and time. Okay? Now, I can't have existed for 70 years and be outside of space and time. Okay? It just is it's nonsense. It's an illogical statement. To say that something is and saying it is also outside of space and time, which is saying it's outside of existence. So you can't say God is and that he's outside of existence. But you could say he's outside of, he extends beyond the created understanding and experience of space and time here. That he extends beyond that. He seems to be able to enter our temporal and spatial existence at his own wish. I mean, he comes and goes as he pleases. But when we come to these, he's not far from us, you know. For in him, he says, we ought not to think of the divine being as silver and gold, and notice this, an image is formed by the art and thought of man. So we have to be careful of defining God by our own imagination, our own thought. You know, Paul, when he's addressing this in Romans, you know, he says we become foolish. We exchange the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man. Now, there isn't, although the Bible says God has created time, like I've tried to give you that, the time he's created is the time that's defined by the creation itself. Obviously, he can't extend beyond the created space and time if he does not himself have existence. Okay, and so I started with that last time. God precedes the universe, and I showed a number of Bible. There's not a lot. Ephesians 1 and other verses where, and especially John 17, where Jesus is praying with the Father and mentions their relationship before the creation. Okay? The love, the glory, the things that they shared together before they made this place. Okay? So they're in communication, they're in a loving communication and a relationship that precedes the creation of space and time. So you see the problem you've got already. In John 1, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with the Father. Now, that's both statements. In the beginning of creation, the Word was facing the Father. It's the word pros. The word with, the usual word for with, is meta in Greek, or soon, and here he doesn't use either one, he uses before. Now, he can't mean I'm before. John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was before the Father. That can't be a temporal statement there. It has to be a spatial one, a local. Where is the Son? He's with his Father. But he doesn't use with, he uses before. But before can have a spatial or relational meaning. It doesn't have to be a temporal one. So in that case, what John is saying is the Father and Son have a relationship before they made the world. And you get that in John 17, that he's talking about the glory that we had, the love that we had. He's praying for you. Jesus is praying, he says that you would love one another like the Father and I and the Spirit love each other. You're to be like us. And so we've talked about that God is before that. But God is also is. In Hebrews it said, to please him we must believe that he is, and is a rewarder of those who seek him. Now, and you have that's 11. By faith Enoch was taken. Without faith it is impossible to please him, for he who comes is 11:6. To God must believe that he is. What does that mean? It means that he is a living God. He is. He takes place. He lives in the present. Okay? Now I want to take you to another passage, because you got those statements all through Revelation. God, the being who was, who is, and who is to come. And that's referring to both of them. It's not just Jesus in his incarnate. That's how a lot of people explain that. Well, that's the incarnate Son of God. No, it's referring to the Father. Now, right before the last day's passage in Luke, we have a conversation. This is in Matthew 22. Okay, he's talking to the Sadducees. Jesus answered them. This is the passage where they try to trick him. If a man dies and has children, his brother has no children, his brother next of kin shall marry the wife and raise up children for his brother. But if he dies, he has no children, goes on for 7 brothers, okay? Then she dies finally, and the question is, who gets the wife in heaven? Because all 7 brothers had her. This is Jesus' answer, and you have to listen to it very carefully. Jesus answered and said to them, you are mistaken, not understanding the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels in heaven. But regarding the resurrection of the dead, you have not read what was spoken to you by God. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Now, you think about that. When most people think, when you think about, and you listen to movies or whatever, they talk about going and seeing relatives, going into the past or traveling into the past so they can visit certain people. Well, the thing is, they're not there. They're here. Here in time, I mean. They may not be here in space, but they are here in time. The only reality is the present reality. You have to understand that. Get rid of your science fiction head. Okay? The only reality is the present reality. And because that's what present means. It means it's real now. And that you have that same, we could go back and spend an hour in Exodus 3, and where Moses wants to define God by the art and image of man. And he gets chastised for it. And God says, I will be whom I will be. First he says, who are you? And he says, I am, present tense, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that's what Jesus is going to here. But then God says, he said, well, I can't go. Moses says to God, he said, I can't go down to Israel, or Egypt. I can't go down to Egypt because I lost my tongue, right? And he said, I will be with you. Now in the Hebrew, there is no past, present, future. So you have to get it. It's either, the verb is either finished or it's in process. Okay? And he uses the word there, ehya. He says, I will be with you, meaning I'm in process. I will be with you. You don't have to worry about messing up because I'm going to be there. And eventually gets Aaron to do the speaking. But then Moses says, okay, I've got that. You're the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Living persons, as Jesus interprets it here. He said, these are living men. They're not living here, but they're living men. And God identifies himself as these living men. He said, I am the God of these living men, even though they've died. Okay? And then he goes, and then when God is talking to Moses, Moses changes the question, and he says, what represents you? What image? Now, you don't get that in the translation because Moses switches from who are you to what are you. And because we say that in English, what are you, or what's your name, we think it's okay, but it wasn't okay. Because you don't ask, in most foreign languages, you don't ask, what are you? You know, that's a rude comment. It's not a... So when Moses asks, what are you, he's thinking Egyptian. He's thinking, are you the Nile? Are you the sun? What are you? What are you? Are you a bull? The people thought he was a bull. He's a calf. Because they made an image of him. What'd they make? A calf. So that's what Moses expected. He expected God to tell him to make a calf or make something. And that's when God gets really, and you can see it in the Hebrew text, he gets really irate at him. He said, I will be what I will be. He's already told him what he is. He says, I'm the God who is with you now. That's what he is. I'm the God of the living. I'm the God who is. I'm the God who represents himself. I don't want any representation of myself. I'm going to represent myself because I'm going to be with you. Now, Jesus picks that up in arguing with the Sadducees. He's quoting right from Exodus. He's the God, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. Now, so when we come to Abraham Heschel, in his work on the prophets, he says the God of the Christians is not the God of the prophets. And the reason he said that is because the God of the Christians is outside of space and time, and the God of the prophets is frighteningly present. That's, I quote Heschel. He's frighteningly present. So in the Old Testament, God represents himself as the living God. You see it all through the Psalms, Psalm 115 and others. You know, we make God out of bones and gold and silver and wood, and we cut down a tree and we burn a fire with it, we make a chair with it, and we make a God with it. And then we worship the God that we've made. And then, according to the psalmist in 115, he says, then we become like the God we've made. So, the God of the Bible is a living God. So last week we talked about the God of the past. Today, emphasizing that the God is present in space and time. Now, not created space and time, because he's not limited or defined by the creation. But space and time are not things. They're not continuance. They're not energy. It's not light. They're really the warp and woof of reality. It's the fundamental to reality. When you say something is real, you're saying that something occupies space and time. It has reality to it. Now, you can't talk about reality without talking about space and time. But you can't also limit space and time to just the concepts of motion in the created world. Because space and time goes way beyond that. And when you start listening to physics or reading physics books, they're trying to figure it out. But a certain amount of humility is important in certain areas. I know for a couple of years, I've been looking into consciousness. And during that time, and it synchronously with my study of it, the world started thinking of consciousness as fundamental. Now, not when I started. When I started, that terminology never came up. But after I'd listened to enough debate and enough arguments over it, the one side, which I would probably agree with more, begin to talk about consciousness as fundamental to everything. And I've talked about that a lot. Now, see, that same thing is true, and the reason they say that is because gravity is now fundamental, like energy is fundamental. Do we know where energy comes from? No. It's fundamental. Do we know where gravity comes from? No, it's fundamental. It's fundamental to stuff, okay? And space and time, I'm going to tell you, is fundamental to stuff. Anything that has existence, anything that is continuing is in space and time. But it doesn't have to be, Earth space and time, or universe space and time, or galaxy space and time. God has his own space and time. But God is a being. He's a living being. And he exists, which means he can move through space in the now. Okay? Now, can you go backwards in time? No. And I will talk about, I thought I would do both today, but I'm not going to do both. I did. But God is existing. We have to believe that he is. What is? It's a present continuous verb. Now, if we're saying God is, we're saying that God continues to exist in the present. That's what we're saying. Now, to turn around and then say God isn't in the present, you're saying God doesn't exist. It's the same thing. To say God doesn't exist in the present is saying that God doesn't exist. Just a fancier way of saying it. Does that make sense? Because if God's outside of the present, you don't have a God. That's what Moses is trying to argue with God. Are you a calf? And he says, do you exist in this present dimension as a calf or a bull or the sun? And God said, no, I exist as me. I exist as myself. I represent myself. I don't have image. I don't have anything represent me. I represent myself. And that's why prayer works, because God represents himself in the present, in the now. Heschel is half right. The God of Christian philosophy, who's outside space and time, is not the God of the prophets. But the God who Jesus represents, he said, I come from the Father to put the Father on exhibition. John 1. Gospel of John, chapter 1. No one has seen the Father at any time, but he who is from the Father has come to put him, and that's exegesis, to put him, to exegete him, to bring out the full and true meaning of God. Okay? Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for coming and doing that for us and showing us that God, your Father, and you and the Spirit are real in the present and are here to represent themselves and lead us into a relationship